Now, there's been concerns over low voter turnout at this year's elections. Some experts say the turnout was due to lack of confidence in government. Let's discuss this with trade union Amcu's Krister Janse van Rensburg. Krister, thank you very much for your time. Now, I went through your statement. You start by saying that the low voter turnout sends a message of South Africans' loss of faith in the electoral system. But some have criticized that decision to stay away, saying voting remains the most impactful form of political participation. We all know what happened with apartheid. We had to vote. To rid ourselves of that system. So why the stay away?
Indeed, Mfundo, and that's also the reason for our concern. You know, the problem is voting is the only way that normal people on the street feel that they have an impact on the decision making in any country. So when people stop voting, one must be very, very concerned about what other way will they use to impact decision making. So it's a very, very dangerous symptom in our view.
So your diagnosis, what would you say are the reasons people stayed away?
I think the reason is quite simply despondency. They feel that their vote has no effect. Combined, one can also analyze it to say that post-liberation, a lot of people who feel obliged to vote for the ANC, or let me rather say who feel obliged that they cannot vote for the Liberation Party, which is the ANC, would rather not vote than vote for another party. So there's a dynamic there that one must also recognize. But still, the fact that people are so despondent not to vote is a red flag, which we cannot ignore.
No, it certainly is of concern. But again, in that statement, you also speak of the neoliberal policies that have widened the inequality gap. But one has always assumed, at least as a layman, I've assumed that you have the ability as organized labor to use your numbers to exert pressure and challenge government on some of their policies. So we would think that you have that rapport with government.
We try, and we constantly do that. I mean, that's why we have Section 77 of the Labour Relations Act. You might recall 20 March 2018, we hosted 4 big marches as Amcu throughout the country, one to the union buildings, where we handed out lots of concrete proposals as to how we can address the socio-economic problems of our country, including job losses and things that lead to despondency in voters, as we just said now. However, the problem, as we all know, I heard your earlier insert from our comrade from Kusatu, who also sees that they feel ignored by the ruling party. The ruling party, since the late 90s, early 2000s, took an economic turn to the right, not to the left. So by right, I mean their economic policies are conservative and new liberal. And that is the problem. So the people who voted for liberalization, who voted to be free, who voted for the socio-economic injustices of apartheid to be rectified, were lied to. They feel lied to.
So what
because to the majority of them, it never came.
So what would be the correct or mostly beneficial to the majority? What would be the ideal economic system in this respect? Because you're saying you're seeing a lot of policies that lean towards the right. You also have some that are calling for policies on the left. Would a centrist government be more appropriate? Because many have actually assumed that that's the posture of Cyril Ramaphosa's administration.
Yes, it does sound like the whole idea of a mixed economy. However, in a developmental state, like South Africa and the most of Africa, one cannot simply have that kind of postmodern view of how it should work. To our view, it's quite simple. We need government investment in infrastructure. We need government investment in basic services such as health, education, safety and security. On the contrary, what we see is the opposite. We see the privatization of all of these services. So what's happening is the state is becoming less and less and less influential in determining the socio-economic reality of the people, and it's left to the free market. And unfortunately, our current sitting state president is one of that school of thinking, that the free market will determine our well-being as a people. And history has shown us the free market is vicious. There's no way you can leave basic services and the socio-economic needs of people to businessmen and capitalists. You can't do it.
Now, speaking of that free market, you also mentioned Action SA's fairly decent performance in Gauteng as somewhat of indicative of growing conservative or even protectionist type of politics, which would really, as some say or some analysts have said, alienate the working class at best. We're so insular now, or at least those that voted for Action SA, according to you, they're insular in their thinking that it's about my economy, me, my services. Can you just elaborate on your concerns around Action SA's fairly decent performance?
Yes, the issue is the moment you have political and economic hardship, the history has shown us the next thing is fascism that comes out of the woodwork. Now, fascism is based on the principle that it's not going well with me, and the reason why it's not going well with me is because because you are here. You are taking my job, you are taking my money, you are taking the things that are supposed to come to me. And unfortunately, Herman Mashaba and the Action SA bandwagon is on that narrative. That's the narrative they're building in. They say the problems in South Africa is because of the porous borders. He's also on record to say that the problems in South Africa is about collective bargaining and the rights of labor, which is completely ludicrous. That is part of the whole social construct of any modern economy. So we are very concerned that this type of thinking will find a good breeding ground in the current economic status of our country.
But he's gone on to clarify, though, I must say, Herman Mashaba, that in terms of the narrative that he's xenophobic, is not true. He said he'd be willing to actually welcome all foreign nationals from all across the world if they were legally documented. That was his position on that. And I know that you've said that most of this type of protectionist politics or rhetoric is what has led to the xenophobic incidents that we've seen in the country. Do you think, though, there is a problem or lack of education around the xenophobia conversation where, like you say in that statement, that perhaps they need to direct their problems at government and the economy, not necessarily their brothers and sisters who are here in South Africa?
Exactly. I always use the example, was Hitler a Nazi? Did Hitler hate Jews? Many people will say, no, he wasn't a Nazi himself. He didn't kill any Jews himself. But the people who followed him did, you know. So the issue is one cannot say that because Herman Mashaba has the intelligence to narrate and to present a narrative around foreigners being in our country and the issue of porous borders in a very succinct and articulate manner, that the voter who supports him and those on the outliers will also have that nuanced understanding. I think not.